Welcome, everybody. I'm Santiago Kneeland, and this is The Divine Within, the invisible connection with God. In this episode, we're going to talk about the Mayan mathematics. As we've heard in past sessions, we've dealt along the lines of time, of space, of how things are uniting in the universe, how we as human beings can collaborate as well, not just as individuals, but as a civilization. So it's very important to keep this in mind to see how we are part of this universe. We are part of this mosaic, of this grandeur of the universe. So we're going to be diving into more details. We have a very interesting person with us this time. Her name is Marjorie Ray. She's been a Urantian student for a long time. She is a scientist that specializes in biochemistry and lipid protein interactions, in integral membrane proteins, lipoproteins, and everything that you have to do with proteins. So I like her take on the biology, on how, that is structured, how that pattern from the universe is in the biology, which we are part of biology. It is in our minds, in our genetic structure, in our cells. So I want to have her take on all this that we've been discussing, and see how this really connects us, how and can also give us meaning, because it's not only about the biological part, but really about the interactions that we have with other people, and how we together, as we interact, are creating and co-creating with God this universe. So thank you for joining us, Margie. It's a pleasure to have you. Welcome to the Divine Within.
Thank you so much, Santiago. I'm very supportive of this project. I just have been so excited about it, and I feel very honored to have been invited to participate. I hope we can give, the value, maybe some value to our experience, but also to possibly give people thoughts about expanding their ideas of the world that we live in, the vast creation that we inhabit, and to honor the creator that made it all.
I think it's very important, like you said, to share our experience, to share the knowledge in there. I think you have a lot of knowledge that you found, but in different sources, not only in the Urantia book, but I think in throughout the scientific research that you've done, you found stuff in there that that there's a correlation to this within the Urantia book. So I wanna see how that works. And one of the important topics that I want to address right away is the concept of time. This is a very interesting topic, because what we were saying and what we were seeing in the past session is that time is not linear. According to the Mayan mathematics, time is not linear. It's radial. So it's doesn't, like we usually see it, it has a beginning and an end. In this case, we have a spiral that goes around and around. It kind of coils into one point, and as you get to the center of it, kind of gets it into a quantum leap, and it disappears from this sequence, from this pattern, and it goes into another pattern. So that's something very interesting that I like about the Mayan mathematics and the cosmology, because it tells you that basically everything, the world, and even us, are in those sequences. Our thoughts are in those sequences. So I want to hear your take on how maybe time is, in this sense, radial, not linear. And what this is saying is that we're repeating. It's we're kind of in the same patterns, maybe in a different higher cycle, or in a lower cycle, but it's the same pattern that keeps repeating. So I wanted to hear your take on this.
Well, there's many levels to that question. We can talk about it cosmically. What we think about is going on in the universe as we define it at the moment, which of course is changing every day in science as we make more and more discoveries of the creation, and that there's that time. You know, Einstein said a lot about time, and he certainly did not see it as linear. Okay, he
Hmm.
realized that it was probably more circular, or at least it had waves in it. Okay, and so um and that there were that it was waved enough that if you could fold two pieces together, you could actually um you know contract time to the point that you could be on one side of something and then suddenly be on the other. And so these ideas about time not being linear as we live. I mean, we think of it because we live our lives in more of a linear format, because I mean that's just the way we are as evolutionary beings. But we're born small, tiny, helpless, and we go through stages of growth, and we don't ever go back to a previous stage, at least not physically. Maybe mentally and emotionally we do regress, but on the physical scale, we normally, in a normal human being, we progress and we never take a step back. And our lives are measured in 1 minute follows the next, and 1 hour follows the next, 1 day follows the next, one season follows the next, 1 year follows the next, and in 1 century follows the next. So our mindset is very much that way because that's what we live. Okay, but that doesn't necessarily mean that's what we have to be totally married to. Okay, we can look at things. Many people have written about the seasons of our lives. That there may be a winter that is followed by a spring, and then followed by a summer, and then followed by a fall. But those are different parts of life, and they can occur at different times and for different lengths of time. Okay, so that's one way we sort of expand our ideas. But then when we begin to look at it as a bigger sort of question, we start getting into this idea about, in the particularly in the cosmos, that things are very cyclical. In other words, that
Yeah.
I kind of like the statement, what goes around comes around. Sort of,
Yeah,
it's sort of a
exactly.
sort of a good statement. Is that things can be very cyclical, and we can see that cyclical nature. Even if we look at human history, we can look at a cyclical nature in a lot of human history. Where empires rise, empires fall. People move. Large cities or settlements are built, and then they are abandoned, and then they go in larger this is sort of the cycle of human evolution that we see that's going on in this planet. But fortunately, it does have a linear component in that we're not still reinventing the wheel. We're well beyond that. So we realize that if you take that, then you're getting more into your spiral. Okay, where
Yeah.
things are moving up, so to speak. And so when you look at human history, it is really more on a spiral to a degree. We know that it falls back and then it goes forward, and then it may fall back and go forward again. So there's all these different ideas and the way to look at just what's happening on our planet. But then when you move outside of our out of our planet, and you look at what um, the astronomers and the astrophysicists and everything are trying to make sense of what is going on, out in the greater part of creation. It just enlarges our ideas about time so much more. I mean, when you're looking up at that star at night, and then when an astronomer tells you, well, that light that you're seeing tonight, left there, 50 billion
Ages,
years ago.
ages, yeah.
It's like it's hard to wrap your mind around, things like that. But here's the thing: is that as we have learned more and more, and astrophysics and astronomy, it is much more in our life than just drawing pictures in the sky, like like Ptolemy did for years and all of that. It's now, we've got these amazing pictures from the Webb and other telescopes and things that we have sent out into the universe, and we're trying to make sense of these things, okay, and what it means. Like, if you didn't read Stephen Hawking's A Brief History of Time, when he talks about, the time horizon and things moving beyond it, that's a very excellent book. It's a very readable book. It's kind of a fun book to read. Okay. Um, but he talks in that book a lot about, some of our perceptions of time, and where time becomes something that may not really resemble a whole lot of what we think we know
Yeah.
right now, but we have certainly enlarged our ideas about time. And I find that I mean, we live in a very exciting time. I mean,
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
like,
exactly.
yeah,
New
it's just,
discoveries that
yeah,
question everything, right?
right. I mean, it's just, and this is what is great. It allows you now, it's sort of like we were, our minds have literally been set free to think about all these really big, big questions that are going on out there, even though we're still living very much a linear sort of life. But that doesn't mean that either emotionally or particularly spiritually, we have to live, a real linear type life.
And that's the whole concept. I mean, the linear time versus the radial time, and you were saying, that we're building on, the previous, and that's the way that we're saying. It's we're repeating a pattern, or we're repeating a cycle, but it's not the same because we've already put this first layer, and it's the
Hmm.
second layer, and it's endless amount of layers that we built. So we're building layers, and that's how we're constructing this world. It's not the same world from 10 years ago, 100 years ago, 1,000 years ago. So as a civilization, and that's the interesting thing about it, it's not that it's just our individual path, it's our collective path as well. Everything is it affects the collective. And what we're saying, and this is very important, what you were saying about the concept. There's I think that materially we see this linear passage of time, because we can't avoid, being born and aging. That's something that I think everybody, I've seen hundreds of gurus and wise men say that they can beat death, and I don't ascribe to that. I think that that's something that you want to live that. I remember, my I used to have a lady when I was in Mexico that would take care of us like a nanny. And she was old. She was 90 something. And she would say, "Oh, shoot, I want to die. I'm through with this. I just want to die." And in a good way, not in a bad way. Says, I'm through with everything. I'm fed up with everything. I just want to go. So I guess you get to that point. But it is important that we see that there is a linear uh, vision or perception that we have with aging for the material part, but there is a spiritual and a mental aspect that we're going to talk about, that does not depend on a linear time, a linear, aging. It depends on the input that you bring, the maturity that you bring, both mentally and spiritually. So that is really comes to it is in your hands, that is a part, that's something that you control in a sense, right?
Right. We're always making choices. It's all about choices. And we're also taking our potentials and actualizing those in the reality that we live in right now. Okay. We do have to inhabit the reality that we live in right now to be effective and productive human beings. Okay. If not, we wouldn't have wonderful fathers. That I have to say happy Father's Day to everybody in America, that it's Father's Day here. And that you have to be good parents, good grandparents. I mean, all these things have to happen in the reality that we inhabit right now. But that doesn't mean that, I mean, I have met 19 and 20-year olds that were far more mature, and both emotionally mature, particularly emotionally mature, and spiritually mature than
Mm-hmm.
some 40, 50, 60-year olds that I know that got stuck somewhere, and they're basically stuck. Okay. And they haven't, but there are plenty of young people out there that are seeking, who are doing wonderful things, making good choices and good decisions for themselves, the people around them, their families, whatever, and even for the world. I mean, but the young people now that I've met give me tremendous hope for a future, because they're beginning to see a future that is, d- so far superior to the one that we could even have dreamed of when I was a young person. Okay.
Well, that's interesting that what you're saying, Margie, and what you're perceiving, and especially if I mean you've had quite some time to see generations come and go, and how that has evolved, and we were talking about how we built on the previous structures, not only the material world but everything, and I think that, for instance, your generation, or your yeah, the baby boomers, I mean, they started with the beatniks and then the hippies, and you guys sort of gave us that foundation. I think that what you're seeing right now is a an upgrade or a progression, and that's something that they talk about in the Mayan concept. It's everything is a progression, nothing is static, or nothing is just uh casual. Everything has a purpose. So there was, the reason why, the summer of love, everything that happened, even the Vietnam War that happened in that time, that really had a reckoning, and the US culture and US society at that time, and that paved everything that now you're seeing. I don't know, maybe that's something, I want to move into another topic, but I think that we can close on time, and how it's a good example what you were saying, what you're seeing with the younger generations, and me as a younger generation seeing what your generation brought to the table. How do you see that?
Well, my generation, being a member of it, I can find fault with it, and I do. I find fault with a lot of it. Is that we didn't take on issues earlier on, that perhaps definitely we should have. Particularly in social and environmental issues. I grew up, though I live in the Pacific Northwest. I grew up in the deep South, and I was taught what I found out later to be, an entirely skewed version of history, particularly the Civil War. And it's just it's just kind of when I look back now, it's sort of appalling. But at that time, it was all I knew. I was growing up under that sort of thing. But we were standing literally on the shoulders of giants. The generation that kept Hitler from dominating the world, okay, and fascism becoming the norm. And my family participated on many levels during that conflict, and did what I considered to be great service to our to our country. So I felt like we really had a lot to live up to, and we didn't necessarily do it. Okay, in some respect, when we got to the age of where we could have been, uh, more active in areas that would have kept us perhaps out of some conflict, had helped more people in our country, um, you know, totally defeat racism in our country. I mean, things like that. My generation did not do all that it should have done, in my opinion. This is purely my opinion, but and the generation that has come after me, they have learned a lot. I mean, when I was interacting with young scientists that were coming through my lab, oh my word, they had such great ideas. Well, people don't understand how creative science can actually be. I mean, designing an experiment can be one of the most exciting things you can do. Okay, I know that I'm kind of geeking out on you here, but it's science and designing experiments can be incredibly creative, and you have to really think about, and some of these young folks would come up with stuff that would just blow you away. I mean, it was just great to be, be around them as I got into the older, age of, as a scientist, and these younger people were coming into my lab. I was very impressed by the level
Well,
at which they educated themselves. Um,
that's what we're talking about. Generations build on the previous generation, and I think that you guys, like you're saying, you built on the greatest generation, which defeated fascism, and at 20 years old, instead of doing experiments or playing music like I was, they were shooting bullets, and surviving World War II. But then you guys came along and you kind of questioned a lot of stuff, what you were saying about how where you grew up, in Birmingham, and then during that time where a lot of racism and conflicts going on. And now you see this generation, which is not only not on mine, but afterwards, that are building on what previous generations have done. So I think it's the aggregate uh, that's really important. But anyways, let's
yeah, I'm
move
kind of
into the
getting you a
next.
little off topic. I'm sorry there.
No, no, don't worry. It's good because we kind of nailed it on how, generation wise, time is building on top of that. And this is a very good example. I mean, this is what it's all about. It's building on the previous. So very good. The construction of this pattern, of this matrix for humans, and I mean, we talked about this in the previous episodes, but what it says is that it stems from two patterns. One that comes from heaven. It's called the 13 tones of creation, and it's 13 tones that they built. Through that everything was built. This is what it says. And then we have the 20 seals of destiny, which are that's the local pattern, the local sequence. And each one, I mean, we're not going to talk about the sequences themselves because it's a long, each one is a long topic. But how humans are, and like this, they stem from this divine sequence, and then you have this local sequence that adapts to the environment, to this local universe, or not local universe, this local world, which is the earth. And and then the focus, or the nucleus, is the sun, and that's how it tells you it's a system. So this second sequence that I was talking about comes from the local, the earth. And the original one, or the first one, the 13 tones, comes from heaven, from God. So you have this local sequence that gets together with this original sequence from heaven, and together they create this pattern of 260 days, or 260 combinations that create the soul schemes. They together combine and make this matrix of 260 energies, combinations of frequencies. And actually, each day has a different energy, and it repeats every 360. It's a cycle. So every 260 days, it repeats itself. So I wanted to get your take on this idea that there's a cosmic or divine sequence in a local, more mundane sequence that together make the human being.
Well, I mean, we're all made up of atoms, okay? And if you look at the pattern of the atom, it is played out in the pattern of our solar system. And then you look at that and you see that it's played out in other places in the universe the same way. And that, there are like spiral galaxies, and there are all different kinds of galaxies. But this idea of something revolving around a center. Okay. Well, that by my belief, that originated in paradise, and an area around paradise that I refer to as Havana. But it is a to me, it is a divine pattern. I believe that it is a pattern that is gifted by God, um, uh, to to us, and that what scientists have done is that scientists have brought to the attention of the general public this pattern, that we started teaching people about, or understanding the pattern of the solar system. And then when we got to where we could look at atoms, things down on the atomic level, and then when we began to look at how particles respond to each other on the particle level of like physics, there's different ways to look at it. But this pattern that we see again and again, this interplay of energies is very much like, if you look in human biology, there are cycles within human biology. I mean, there's, of course, the best known cycle is the menstrual cycle for women, but there are many cycles that occur. There's your sleep cycle, for a better example of things. There are cycles of different hormones in your body, at different times during the day, and also during your whole life cycle. Okay, when your biology is much different when you're older than when you were younger. We all recognize that, but they are all these interplay of cycles. And when you want to look at the human body, and you get into particularly hormones and endocrinology, and how those affect the cycles, like even your eating cycle, when you're hungry, when you're not, all these cycles that make up part of our lives. But then cellularly, there are also cycles going on where there are cells that are replaced at a higher rate than other cells. It's the fact that you can lose a large part of your liver, and your liver will regenerate itself. Okay. And so there are these cycles that do occur at the cellular level in the human body. Um, all of this is, these are the patterns that are there.
Well,
What science does is that science is able to elucidate them and understand them more, so that to either, like, maybe cure disease, or at least explain why you can't sleep at night, or
yeah,
whatever. It gives you
it's
a good,
interesting.
like, it may be a good explanation, and some ways to possibly treat a problem, or explain a behavior, or whatever you're
It's
wishing to
understanding
try.
these pattern.
What?
What you're saying, Margie, understanding these patterns, that we can see how we can fix them or not fix them.
Well,
But
some of them are, some of them you definitely would like to fix. I mean, people that have trouble sleeping would really like for us to be able to to cure their insomnia. Okay. But there are things that allow you to help people, make hopefully make their lives better, in the sense that they don't consider themselves suffering from something, whatever. I mean, look at people that have thyroid, like thyroid disease. Thyroid is such a huge controller of your metabolism, a lot. Okay. And it wasn't until about 20 years ago, they kept wondering why people that were like in ICUs would develop a thing called ICU psychosis. It's where they couldn't really stay in reality. Things were really. And then they found out two things that were really important. One is that almost everybody that's in the ICU for more than 48 hours becomes what is referred to as euthyroid sick, and in other words, their thyroid ceases functioning. And so that's one thing. The other thing is that now when you go into an ICU, you don't see the bright lights on all the time, but up until about 20 years ago, there were bright lights on all the time. And the thing is that our brain, needs to have dark to be able to reset itself. Okay. And so these are the sort of cycles that happen that we have to understand so that we don't do things that mess them up, because we're, and so that's what science does, and so now, people that are in really bad situations in ICUs, either by injury or illness, their sleep times are more, they take note of those. The light that's in the room, and they check their thyroid and see if they need thyroid hormone replacement or whatever, so that they don't develop these conditions that are really hard. I mean, it does nothing to help them get better. Okay, and so there are all these little sort of cycles I mean, that's what science is about. Is they're trying to figure these things out in many cases to help people manage things within their lives. And we live in a very complicated society now. We're not living in a hut out in a field where we don't have light, and it automatically becomes dark and we go to sleep and we get up. I mean,
Yeah.
that's what our biology was based on, but that's not the biology that's not the reality that we live in now. Okay, so we need to understand our biology to know how to manipulate our environment to make us healthier and able to have coping mechanisms for the society that we do live in now. So
That's interesting, Margie. We started this talking about that, or I was saying that humans are created by these two sequences: one emanating from Habana, as you called it, from heaven; one stemming out from our local world. And together we make this divine human creature, which is human beings. So that's. But then we moved into the concept of patterns and sequences, and what you were saying is very interesting. That science kind of uh, finds and studies these sequences, these patterns, in order to, first of all, understand them. Second of all, try to see if you can change them. And you were giving us some very good examples of how to break some patterns. And I want to go beyond the physical and the patterns that may be very evident, but patterns that we create. And these are the patterns that uh, virtuous or vicious cycles that we create, and that's very interesting, because sometimes we kind of fall victim to life. And I want to bring this, and I don't know why it came to my mind now that we're talking about patterns, but the good patterns that we can develop, and the bad patterns that we can develop, and we were saying that we're sort of slaves to the pattern of time, of aging, of the material life, that, or the material body that we have. But we do have certain opinion, or certain range of action, when we talk about the mind and when we talk about the spirit. It's not that we're just evolving. It would be very easy, everybody just grows in spirit, and we get to a certain point and everybody just gets smart. And something that life has taught me, that you don't get smart. You were saying about that. You can be 80 years old, 90 years old, and you're not smart. And maybe you have a 10-year-old that's really smart. So it's interesting how maybe we can't control certain patterns, or we participate in certain patterns, and some certain patterns that we just have to adapt to. I don't know.
we have choices. I mean, we have free will choice to make decisions, for ourselves. Okay, and these choices, everybody wants them to be black and white. This is bad and this is good. And a lot of choices are, but a lot of choices are not. They're sort of like shades of gray. And you realize that if I do this, then this could happen and that could happen, and that may be okay, but then it might, not be okay on this side, but it may be okay on that side. And so, but we still have to make, we do make choices, or we kind of opt out and just sort of roll with
Mhm.
whatever time throws at us. And the people that I've seen that have done that, I have to say, I can't say that they're incredibly happy. People, they don't seem to be very in charge of their own lives, but a lot of times they've opted to not be. Okay. And I in many ways, I think we need to have great compassion for those people, because they are not accessing and using that free will choice that God has given us. Okay, we that's what God gave us, and we should exercise that. Not all of our choices are going to be good, and there are ones that we're going to do that are not going to be good, but we have to learn to make amends, forgive ourselves,
We have to make
learn.
the mistake
Yeah,
and be able
learn.
to
Yeah,
learn from that
learn.
mistake.
Yeah, you'll always learn so much more from your mistakes. I'll just tell you, I learned. You talk to any scientist, and they'll tell you that for every one experiment that succeeded, they had 99 that failed. Okay, and you learn so much more. And this has been one of the big downfalls of science, is that we don't have a journal where people talk about their failures, so that people are constantly reinventing these old failures that people, if you had been able to talk to and knew what they had done in their lab, you would have never gone down that road. But you don't know, because they don't tell you what didn't work, they only tell you what did work. And that's a bad mistake, because now with AI having all that negative stuff that we didn't know, we can use all that. Okay.
Exactly.
Right.
Well,
But
I
we don't
think
have, yeah. Yeah. So
AI
that
can
was a
dig it out.
choice. Yeah. That was a choice that we made way back when, which was not necessarily advantageous to us now. Okay. But we have to go forward. Okay. With what we've got. And so I foresee in the future that, hopefully labs, once we get over this thing about, you can only publish positive, good results that support your hypothesis and all that. If they could also, at the end of their papers, publish everything they tried that didn't work, that would
Well,
be really, really helpful,
that saves you a lot of time and a learning curve. I mean,
Right.
that's something and something, that I learned in life, academically. I learned how to do this, in sales and how to engage in business. But this is something that I also learned, empirically, just from experiencing life. You first have to go in small steps, kind of test out the waters. You don't jump into the water. You first kind of touch it, see if it's cold, if it's hot. Then you kind of have. But if you don't touch it, you're not gonna learn of it. And
Right.
and, and you're saying it's very important. All the mistakes that are out there that we don't know about that could save so much time. It's very important, and you're right. Scientists know that to reach the one conclusion, you first have to mess up 99
Yeah,
more.
right. And so, and you hear about the positive ones, you don't ever hear about, all those negative ones. But I mean, that's the life of a scientist, and in some other professions it's the same way. But we all learn from experience, and we make choices. Okay. And so it's the choices that we make, choices that we make emotionally and particularly spiritually, about, that affects not only your life, but perhaps the people, around you. Okay. And so, but there are ways to, in my particular experience, my personal experience, spiritually, I pray. I pray with people, and I pray myself to develop my relationship with God. Um, it doesn't inform my science per se. It informs how I relate to the other scientists around me. As
Okay.
fellow children of God, at doing the best they can at the moment with what they have. That's what I think is expected. Okay. Or what we should at least strive for. And so we make, um, decisions, emotionally we make decisions, sometimes flash emotions. I don't like that person. They hurt me. They did, this. And we learn, I think, as we go through. And this is another thing I found out about a lot of young people. Young people have a lot more compassion in my experience than older people do. It's sort of like, you should know this and, get on with it. But the younger people seem to get the thing about compassion. I mean, they get what Jesus said about compassion. And um I'm just, it just really blows me away, that that people actually use the word compassion now. I mean, when I was growing up, we very rarely ever heard the word, compassion, except maybe in church when they were talking about Jesus. But beyond that, it was not. Now people realize that compassion, you're not a weak person when you show, compassion, and, and that you have emotional, what they call emotional intelligence, to know, when something requires compassion. Okay. It just sort of shows how we are evolving. Um, in many ways, I see a lot more compassion being, evinced on the world, in the world, than I thought I would see during my lifetime, actually. And so, um, I'm glad I've lived to see it, develop that much so
Well,
far. So,
well, that's great. Your story, Margie, and how you see this, and how you frame with the science, and how the different generations have built on the previous ones, how we are influenced by patterns, and the sequences that are around, some that we have control over, maybe not complete control, but we do have an opinion and a say in them, and can contribute. Like you were saying, there's some people that kind of just are on the fringe, or they're not really involved in certain things, and some people that do get involved. And it depends. One of the things that I mentioned before is that there's three types of energy. The positive, the negative, or the qualities. Positive, negative, and neutral. And you were saying about prayer and the way that we conduct ourselves, the decisions, and we kind of, in a way, are also making that decision if we want to be a negative, if we want to be a positive, if we want to be a neutral in the configuration of and the unfolding of this universe. And that brings me to the next topic, which is the gear system. And it's a very interesting thing, because it tells us that these sequences, although the universe, or the human matrix pattern is this, what we talked about, these two sequences. It tells us that inside of us we have this dynamic sequence, or we have kind of a bigger gear and a smaller gear. So let's think of, a big gear that has 20 seals, and then we have a smaller gear that has 13 tones, and inside of it, it's kind of making, the configurations, and it's giving you the different patterns, and that is us. And then we are connecting, that's us, and are connecting to this other pattern, this other sequence, which is our life. And then the lives of others are intertwining into this grander sequence, which is us, and together we make another sequence and another sequence. So in a nutshell, what I'm trying to say is that this gear system, or this gear concept, is that we're all the sequence, or this pattern that's unfolding within each other, and then unfolding together as individuals, and then together as individuals, as this humanity. So I see sort of that we're the cells, the individual is the cell. Then the collective starts to be, our individual relationships are like the organs. And then, the higher structures, the higher organizations are the organisms, they're the bodies, not just the organ, but the full body. So in a way, it tells us that we act in that way. And I use these, and like, yeah, you're a scientist, and you kind of, you see another system to understand this system. You copy it. You try to understand, if this is this way, then this kind of mirrors that, and sees it in another way. So I see that this is the same. not only are we in this magical mosaic or play of cycles, but we also participate in these cycles. So that's and it, I like it because it all in the end falls back on us and falls back on how we do our lives, how we live our lives, and how we conform our lives in a way.
Yeah, I mean, one of the most exciting things that's happened during my scientific career was the Human Genome Project, and this is sort of what you're talking about. You know, when we find out just how related we all are, you know, and I remember when it started. I remember um, Francis Collins, he's one of my heroes. That on the project, I followed Francis the whole time they were developing it, um, and I was at it. I was at a big meeting, a big science meeting, where the the magazine called Science. We were given a pre-release copy at this big meeting, and in it was um, uh, a thing that you could fold out and make a big poster for your. It was huge, a huge poster. You had to have a big wall to put in a. But it was the whole human genome.
Okay.
The first time they did it. Okay. And it was at this meeting, and everybody just went off, and I mean it's just real quiet because everybody was like, they did it, they like totally different, they totally did it. And uh I've still got that magazine. It's a beautiful, they have a great front on that magazine, and I still have, it's folded away. I don't have it stayed on my office wall until I retired. Okay.
Well,
And
you
it
have to. That's a collector's item.
yeah, yeah. But of course, now there's a lot more stuff that's filled in, because at that time there was a lot that was not, and we're filling in more, almost daily or hourly in some cases, of things that are there that are, but we've learned, a lot of things that we didn't know even back then. I mean, epigenetics has now come on the scene, and we realize that even identical twins, after they and in utero, yes they are, but once they're born, they're really no longer really identical, because there's changes going on in their genomes that it happens to one, it doesn't happen to the other, and all this different stuff. But it's here again. It was and is a very exciting time to be alive. I'm part of the all of us study here in the United States, where Francis wants 1 million people to give them all of our data, and I do. I give them every time I go see a physician or have a test or whatever. It all goes. Every bit of information goes to them, and they have my genome, so that eventually, Santiago, I don't know if it'll happen during your lifetime, but I suspect it will happen during uh, Leah and Luca's lifetime, your children, that when they go to the doctor and they are ill, they're going to be treated as the individual they are.
Mhm.
Okay. That medicine will become very, very individualized. We already have some of that. One of the prime ones is children. Well, it was found in adults that had leukemia, but then it was found in children. It's called the Philadelphia gene, and it means that for children that have that gene and have leukemia, it takes twice as much chemotherapeutic agent to get them in remission as a child that does not have it. Okay. So that's an example of
Yeah.
us learning about things that could help, save people's, even literally their lives. But the during your children's lifetime, um and see, this is the thing that's so exciting. We're appreciating just how individual and yet how alike we all are. Okay. And that's what is so amazingly exciting on the gene, on the genomic type level. um
Let me rephrase that or repeat that. you're finding out how alike and how individual we are at the same time. I like
Right.
that.
Yeah. I mean, it's just it's so, it is really, really, really exciting. And I, you know, I know that science may not be a lot of people's hot topic, but it can be a really phenomenal career, and it is. I love my career. I love doing it. It is very exciting. You meet just I mean, there are amazing people the world over in many, many disciplines, and I have met a few. Um, but studying science now in the age that we're in, with the changes in cosmology, the web, with the genome project, with all of these things that we've taken such giant leaps within my lifetime. Okay, I've seen this. It's just been, I'm very grateful to have been in the time that I've been allowed. But I'm going to leave it to you guys to continue on and do good stuff. You know.
Well, we still want to have you a long time, Margie. There's still a lot of knowledge that you can share, but it's interesting how we're seeing, how this is and the whole point of the divine within is finding this divine spark within us, and that even in something as mundane as science, because I don't want to classify it as mundane, and I think that you as a scientist, you see it completely different. And I love the way that you also get the concepts, that although there's a mathematic to it, a pattern to it, there's a volition, the human volition involved. This is the most important thing about it, that we're not an accident, and that's what sometimes we see science. Oh, they're explaining this accident that we are. And what you're saying and what a lot of scientists are saying, and now that, especially with this new technology, is that we're exactly the opposite as of a fluke, of an accident. We're basically a the wildest conception that you can imagine, complication that you can imagine. And that's something that I realized when my wife got pregnant from my first daughter, and that's something that I mention a lot. It was the first time I saw myself in that sequence of life, that my cell was going to be a human being. And suddenly you go to the first ultrasound and you just see a bunch of cells, you know, not a real figure, or nothing to write home about. And suddenly, as the time goes by, you suddenly get to the last month, and it's a whole human being. And suddenly it comes out. And I remember one of the things that I would ask myself, what would her eyes be, her color of her hair, those details that before it's just, in a possibility. We're talking about possibilities and actuals, and suddenly she's born, and that's an actual. Another thing that it's just to finish this part, that I realized and this happened with my last daughter, my third daughter. Not that didn't happen with my first two children. When we come into the hospital, you don't know this, but I know women go and give birth, but we men are in the background doing all the paperwork. You don't see that doesn't come out, but there's a lot of paperwork, a lot of paper signing. You don't know what they're putting in front of you, so you have to be with a cool head, and you're registering, so they register that your wife, and you go into labor and you go through that process, and it probably takes a whole day. And then suddenly they call me and they tell me, you have to register your daughter. It's like, yes, when I came in there, it was just me and my wife. And now there's another human being there that I have to register as a patient in the hospital that before did not exist, so that dawned on me. It didn't dawn on me before on the previous children, but it's something very magical. Suddenly now somebody exists. And when you see it in that way, and you see science in this way, you find the divine within, right?
Mhm. Oh, absolutely. You totally, um, see, I mean, there have been some really great scientists in this country and in other parts of the world who have now, since the 1990s, been saying that the physical parameters for life to exist within the cosmos that we know, the physical universe as we know it, is so small. You know, if you look at all the conditions out there, but where life exists is so small. And of course, now we're finding it on many planets because we know what to look for. Okay, and we have the ability to look. But you know, there is a reason for this very narrow area for life to flourish, to exist, and it wasn't an accident. It was, and that's what they're saying is that, I mean, and these are like really big name scientists. They're going, this cannot be an accident. Okay, this is not order coming out of chaos spontaneously.
Yeah.
This is an actual thing, and so it's like you saw your daughter or your children first as sort of what, just kind of a mass of cells, and you sort of say, oh, well, that's not. But of course, to creation, to God, that was already your child. They already
Yeah. Yeah.
recognized that as your child. But you got to the point to where, when you were told you had to register a new human being, you were like, wait a minute, two have become three. Okay. Well, that's
Yeah.
pattern.
Exactly.
Okay. It's just exactly
Exactly.
like we talked
Exactly.
about before. Okay. It was that the guy, God and the son, and they all of a sudden had the spirit. Okay. And so it's pattern. You experience that
You're in
same
that
pattern.
sequence. You're in that progression
Right.
that we're talking
You're
about.
in that experience in this very narrow physical space that we know is out there all over now because we found it. And this is happening all over, and there's no accident to it. Okay. And it just speaks more to, you know the at least what I consider the divine within me. It 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 makes me joyful. It makes me grateful. That I have been given this opportunity to experience this. Okay, that I have been gifted with the opportunity to make choices and decisions and participate in the development of humankind and humanity. And this is, I say this in all with all gratitude, that I'm glad to. I mean, if you want to talk about chosen, I feel like you're chosen to be Santiago, and Margie was chosen to be Margie.
Of
And
course.
we're very, we're very lucky. We have like won the jackpot.
Yeah. Well, I'm really happy to have had to hear Marchie. I mean, it's a topic that we can spend hours and days and
Yeah,
go through all the rabbit holes. But what I take from this is that there is something more than just random patterns. There is a sequence, a purpose to these patterns, to these cycles, and that we are part of these. And that's the other part, that not only do we understand them, but do we also participate in them. And like in any game, the more that you know about the game, the more you play the game, the more you will be good at the game, more you will enjoy the game. And I think that's with life. We have to understand these patterns, and it's not just what we're talking about of growing old. We all understand of what growing old is, but growing in wisdom, growing in intelligence, growing in spirit. What does that mean, and what does that entail? Right?
absolutely. I'm right there with you, Santiago.
Well, thanks a
we
lot,
all just
Margie.
want to, yeah, just keep hopefully, doing the right thing and following the divine within us. That we with every person, every fellow that we meet.
Yeah.
They're doing the same thing. Okay, they're doing the exact same thing.
And
So
when we understand that, we find that brother in the inside of us, that we're all striving for that, and we all have that divine within and the divine connection.
Right, right, absolutely. Well, this has been a joy. Thank you so much.
Well, thanks, Margie, and hopefully this is just the first of many topics and things that we're going to be talking about. But it's been a pleasure. Thank you. And to all the viewers that have been with us, if you like this program, please remember to subscribe, like, share, comment with people. You know, tell them there was these two people talking about these interesting things, and you should listen to it and share. I think that's the most important way to promote this. But thank you for your time. Thank you, Margie, once again, and thank you all of you that are watching. This is Santiago Kneeland, the Divine Within, and take care of yourselves and Carpe Diem.